Welcome to Tank Talks, your personal think tank for startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. This week's episode is a conversation I had with Kyle Westaway, founder and managing partner of Westaway Law, an innovative law firm designed for helping startups. On today's talk, we discuss how Kyle and his team are helping reimagine how law firms can serve startups better by using the software as a service model. Kyle shares his views on why startups have traditionally hated lawyers so much and how transparency is key to a successful relationship between law firms and founders. We discuss how lawyers are often far removed from the business side of the equation and often get wrapped up in the legal minutia by over-lawyering when working with startups. Kyle shares ways in which startups and lawyers can stay connected on the business side when not consistently working together. This Tank Talk really helps you think about why lawyers and startups are always at odds with each other and how Westaway is trying to change that. Now let's get into this week's chat with Kyle Westaway on reimagining the law firm to better serve startups. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Kyle.
Hey, good to be here, Matt.
I'd love to start talking about how we can reimagine the way law firms serve startups. And I'm going to start with a pretty pointed question. Historically, startups and lawyers have not mixed so well. Why have startups hated lawyers so much?
I think the main reason is that I don't think most lawyers know what it's like to be an entrepreneur and are not kind of aware of the reality of trying to build something from scratch. So I think that there is a lack of empathy that comes with most lawyers, and it probably feels cold, callous, disconnected for most entrepreneurs. My story is that I started as an entrepreneur first and was building my own company for a number of years with friends, and recognized that the current kind of startup law ecosystem wasn't really all that well designed for early stage companies. So I felt the pain points myself as an entrepreneur and tried to keep that in mind as we were building what became Westaway, the law firm.
Yeah, so I mean, it really stems from makers versus managers or builders versus, sales people or whatever you want to call it. So it sounds like there's a misalignment just in terms of the products and services that two parties are trying to meet in the middle on. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know that it's a misalignment. Like hopefully people entrepreneurs understand what they're trying to purchase, and hopefully law firms understand what they're trying to sell. I don't know that it's a misalignment on what the thing is. I think it's more of a misalignment on approach, on the experience more so than the what. It's the how.
Right. And we'll get into that and how you're doing it at Westaway. But, given that startups are obviously very short on funds, how have you thought about how lawyers can create a better alignment with startups in the early stages?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think that the standard law firm model is not really well set up to address these types of companies. I founded the firm 13 years ago. So we started from the ground up working with early stage companies. And because of that, we had to just figure out what our business model was going to be. I didn't come out of big law I didn't have that business model baked into me. And so I was very open to how we might iterate on, what business model might work for these type of clients. And we spent a lot of time just banging our head against the wall. The kind of typical approaches are either pro bono or deferred fees, which can, sometimes result in amazing outcomes. Sometimes it's a win-win for everybody. And sometimes it's not, and the outcomes sometimes are, poor quality service and a bill down the line that is like really huge once you're actually moving. So we just thought maybe we should do it differently. We started by kind of just listening to clients and listening to entrepreneurs and trying to figure out what matters to them. What I thought at the beginning would matter is low price. Like get the price as low as you possibly can because that's what's necessary at the early stages. What I learned is that that's important, but the thing that's actually more important than that is cost certainty. And so at an early stage, most entrepreneurs can't deal with surprises, can't deal with major surprises, at least from a cash flow perspective. If an engagement is clear and simple and transparent upfront that this is how much it's going to cost, the entrepreneur can make that decision. They can make the decision of whether it's worth it or not for them. A lot of conversations I have, even still today, with very early stage entrepreneurs, I'm like, hey, here are the 3 things that you're asking me to get done. It's going to cost you X, Y, and Z to get these three things done. Let me know if that makes sense for you. And a lot of folks are like, we'd love to do it. We just don't have the money to do it. And that's fine. What is respected, at least, is that there's not a surprise bill. So a lot of, if anybody out there is running a founder of a startup They may be familiar with this surprise bill from the lawyer. You get a letter, shows up at your office, and it has a legal letterhead on it, and your heart starts like pounding a little bit because you're not sure, is this going to be a $2,000 bill or a $20,000 bill? And you open it up, and if there is a surprise, it's never a surprise in the entrepreneur's favor. It's rarely ever like, oh my gosh, this is cheaper than I thought it was going to be. It's mostly surprisingly, wow, that I guess that email did cost me $700. And those sorts of surprises. So to answer your question, what we found is it seems to be really important to folks that we work with to have cost certainty and transparency on what they're actually buying, what they're paying for and what they're buying. And I think that can really be adopted industry-wide if lawyers in the startup ecosystem would embrace only that one thing, clear, transparent pricing. I think that would go a long way to alleviate a lot of the tension between entrepreneurs and lawyers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've had that heart palpitation moment several times. And I remember when we sold our first startup to Yelp, there was like a $150,000 bill at the end that we had no idea where that came from. That was a very scary moment. And even with our own startups at Ripple, we've had, founders call us and say, I just got a bill for $40,000 and I only sent 2 emails to the lawyer. Where is this coming from? And sort of, our job as the investor is trying to be in the middle, trying to understand, you pay for what you get. In terms of if you get a really cheap bill, you probably got maybe terrible service. And if you got a really expensive bill, who's to say you got the best service when you could have probably figured out you could have done half the work yourself and then gotten half the fees. So transparency is absolutely key. But kind of going back to your first point on pro bono work, how do lawyers kind of manage the pro bono work and compare it to like the value that startup gets versus those maybe later stage companies that are paying the bills and putting food on the table when they deserve, let's say, more of your time, but still add value to the early stage startups? How do you survive that sort of pecking order as a startup?
Yeah, I actually think you're at the bottom of the list in that scenario. We have a lot of what I call pro bono refugees. They've done the pro bono routes at some firm and they just can't get an email response back. Every once in a while, there's great stories like, oh my gosh, this woman or this man at this firm jumped in, super helpful and did a great job. And I just like celebrate those stories. The more common story that I hear is I'm at the back of the pile and, if they have time at midnight on Saturday, they might get around to doing the thing that needs to be done. So it's oftentimes a lack of prioritization, sometimes even a lack of like competency. I've seen a lot of instances whereby potential clients have talked to me, decided to go with pro bono because free is a great price. And then they'll circle back and be like, hey, can you explain to my lawyer how to do the thing that we were talking about doing? To which I kindly respond, no, thank you. But yeah, so we have to do sometimes a little bit of cleanup after the pro bono work, or just repairing trusts with like how a lawyer entrepreneur relationship could be, reimagining that with them.
Yeah, I definitely think, transparency, it all starts with transparency. And even if it's on the higher end of, what the founder was expecting, at least you are transparent on what it's going to be. What we've said to our founders and to our counsel is, let's set a budget right before we even get started and let us know as we get close to hitting that cap and how much left we have to do on the file before we go through that, barrier, so that we're all on the same page and we don't get shocked with that $150,000 bill instead of a $20,000 bill. So that's the one way we work about it, and we share that with our founders as well, and it seems to work.
I love that. And if you're working in the hourly context, that you should do 0 engagements that don't have that conversation. Even better than that is to just set a flat fee. Instead of saying, here's a cap, here's a budget, let us know when we're getting close to it, just agree that it's going to be X. And, oftentimes it may even be better for them to say, I think we'll do this for $10,000, whatever, to say, hey, what if we did a flat fee of $11,000? Even like going up a little bit, it's oftentimes better because those budgets can expand as the project goes forward. And even getting something a little bit higher, but that's fixed and set, can come to better outcomes. Obviously, lower and fixed is the best, right?
Agreed. Yeah. And last thing I'll say is I think startups would understand that well because of custom implementation fees that they're used to being or charging themselves for enterprise customers, let's say. So I think that would work well with them. But let's move on to another topic. So, lawyers tend to be worst case scenario people, which is part of their job. Totally understand that. But entrepreneurs tend to be optimists. How can startups and lawyers find a balance with such an extreme clash of mindsets?
A good lawyer's job is to set risk profiles and to give clarity of like, hey, this is the risk that you're opening up to if we take this route, if we take this route, if we take this route, right? And give agency to the entrepreneur to decide what level of risk matters to them. I really appreciate and fully respect lawyers that really want to, coming from a very authentic place, want to do the right thing and the best thing and have zero risk. I just think that only works on like Fortune 500 budgets. It doesn't work for seed stage companies. And so you can get, we'll say any given document, you could get it down to what we'll say 5% risk for, $1,200. But to get that other 5% out, you may need to pay $10,000 more to get it there. So I think that if there is a clear understanding of what the risk profile is and giving the entrepreneur agency to select which profile they'd prefer, that's great. Now, what I'll say is what I see as a mistake for a lot of lawyers that are in the startup space is over-lawyering deals, over-lawyering on points that will very rarely ever come up. It's a good intention, and sometimes it comes from like a lack of experience that you don't understand that this deal point will never ever be relevant. But the over-lawyering is you're incentivized to do so when you're charging by the hour, right? You will go to that $12,000 budget. If you're charged by the hour, you'll over-lawyer a deal because you make more money over-lawyering a deal. So I think good lawyers are allowing giving clarity on risk profile and then giving the entrepreneur agency to select which risk profile works for them.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is there's legal risk, which you can explain the way the law is written and precedents around that. But then there's also business risk. And that's a little bit more ambiguous and sort of up to the entrepreneur which path they want to take. What I've seen work from our side is we understand the legal risk and we're pretty clear on the outcomes on which way it would go. But when it comes to business risk, that is personal preference on, look, there is a chance it can go this way, and that's a 5-10% chance. But this is the benefit of you taking this risk is that your business could go in a much farther direction than it currently is right now by taking on that, extra clause that the investors maybe are asking for. The other thing I think I hear you saying is the over-lawyering part. That's really interesting because sometimes I find there is over-lawyering, but there's also under-lawyering. For example, one of the companies that we had invested in had a clause before we invested that every single shareholder needed to approve any change to the documents, even like the smallest shareholders. And it created a huge shit show for any new investors coming into the next round. And I just don't understand how professional lawyers could set a company up for such devastating blockers early on.
I think that's over in the sense that they want to have such a high level of protection on any changes to the status quo that they're putting up a crazy amount of administrative burdens to get small things done. I would put that on over-lawyering. Like that, there's no need for that. That's what major shareholders, the term major shareholders are for, so you can get things done quickly.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It is over-lawyering. I mean, over-lawyering for the smallest of, influencers in the company, right? Like we have major investor rights on all our documents, obviously, as institutional investors, but you're absolutely right. That definitely was over-lawyering now that I think about it. So, we often hear founders say that as entrepreneurs, their job is to create and build things. And, you have entrepreneurial experience, so you could probably relate to that. But it's not very common for lawyers to have that building experience. So one, is this a fair assumption for all the lawyers? And how should founders think about the lawyers they're working with and their ability to build things when they're typically just service providers?
The entrepreneurs are the builders, and that is just like total hats off to entrepreneurs for taking the risk to try to make something that was never in existence before. It's like a huge hurdle, and walking away from other more prestigious and safe life paths. Like that is building, and that is to be commended. Lawyers are service providers. I think In the best case scenario, they're great counselors. They're able to kind of give really great advice. But that's all we are. We're not building this day to day. I think the analogy, if we're calling the entrepreneur the builder, I think a really great attorney is an architect. All they're doing is helping to kind of lay out how the structure should work. I think about this. I think about it as like, hey, let me understand what the business and operations of the company is, and then let me build around that, to make the highest impact. That impact may be financial. It may also be social, environmental. You can design for whatever outcome you want to design for, but the architect's job is to put pen to paper to set up that infrastructure, but then it has to be built. The architect is not on the construction site every day, right?
I love that. Yeah, the architect analogy is a perfect analogy because they are responsible for like the structural things, but not keeping everything going on a day-to-day basis. And, there are times where counsel and lawyers could be game changers at a very critical juncture in the next steps of a company, whether it's an M&A, liquidity event, or some type of, big change in the organization. They do get called in as a hired gun. And if they do a good job, it could be a game changer for the company. But if they don't do their job well, that could be devastating. And one thing you talked about is staying close to the business side, right? Being close to the operations as best you can. And sometimes lawyers do a really bad job of staying close to the business side of the equation. And they often, just get wrapped up in that legal minutia. So how do you think about how lawyers can stay connected to businesses more often than not so they can help out when they come in as that architect?
I think the best counsel to startups are curious. They exhibit curiosity and are interested in understanding what the actual business is doing. Some things to keep in mind as an entrepreneur, as you're thinking about, hiring counsel, is it's helpful for lawyers, or lawyers are more willing to put in the work to understand, which, takes time really, to understand what the business is doing and what the real levers in the business are, if they understand that it's a longer term relationship. I'm not saying that an entrepreneur should say, I want to get married on the first date. But if there's somebody that you've enjoyed working with, maybe you start to talk in a little bit more long-term frames of reference, and that allows them to be a little bit more invested in something beyond one transaction at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen some lawyers take a huge liking to companies, and they're almost some of their closest friends now, and like they have a very good relationship. I think it kind of starts with the willingness to open up to each other as well as operators and founders and maybe legal partners. One thing we've recommended at Ripple is to include lawyers on monthly updates, just like you would to any other investor or stakeholder. I think that gets them maybe excited about certain things, keeps them up to date when there's so many other things flying around. But I do find that sometimes when lawyers are brought in to help on a situation, they haven't stayed in touch with the company for like 6 months. And there's a lot of catching up to do. So do you have any of companies sending you monthly updates? What kind of tricks do you have that work for you?
Yeah, for our general counsel clients, if they have essentially professional investors on their cap table and are doing the investor updates, we're on them. We want to know kind of like what's happening on the business side. And it's fun to see the charts, and hopefully they're slowly up and to the right, Actually, as an attorney, it's great to say like, oh, I've made a small, tiny contribution to this thing moving forward and continuing to prosper. So I love that idea. I would totally plus one that comment to put them on the updates.
And what advice would you have for founders when you have yourselves coming in after another counsel has been let go? What sort of suggestions do you have for like good transition from one counsel to another?
Again, this depends on whether it's can you just come and do a thing, or we'd like to work longer term. But that transition is going to be logistical in some nature. So you'll have like some docs that need to be like migrated over. What's important for us is we like to see kind of like the history of how a document has evolved over time, so we can kind of say, oh, okay, I understand. Looking at the first version of this, I understand why it changed in the second and third version. So seeing a little bit of historical context around the key driver docs for your organization is helpful. Seeing a timeline is like literally a slide with a timeline is like really nice and helpful to say like, hey, we were founded at this point. We got our first product into market here, blah, 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 milestones along the way. Maybe we had 2 investment rounds and here's where they were and this is what it looked like. So any visual of a timeline is really helpful as well.
That's a really good point. I hadn't actually thought about that, like a timeline on all the key milestones, price rounds, name changes, acquisitions, founders leaving, joining, things like that. That's a really good idea. One thing I've thought about a lot about is how nothing is guaranteed in legal advice. Unfortunately, you spend a lot of money for informed legal opinions, and sometimes it can be poor advice, but it ends up becoming the founder's problem. And this is pretty frustrating for startups. We're used to vendors delivering on what we pay for. So how should startups think about paying for legal advice?
I didn't realize this was as big of an issue, but we recently did a survey internally with some of our clients. And one of the things that we got feedback on is like, it's really refreshing to work with us because literally one quote was, with my bigger firm, I felt like I was paying for their mistakes. They were wasting my time. So that not only was it like the mistakes were made, I was paying to do that and I was wasting time and money to get that done. Man, that sucks. Like that does not sound fun. I do think that one solve to this is getting a clear, flat, transparent fee and getting clear scope of deliverables. We are going to get this done and it's going to cost this much money. In that context, it's clear that X has been done or not. Like the deliverables have been delivered or they haven't been delivered. That contract has been signed or it hasn't been signed. If there are, little glitches, little mistakes along the way, and honestly, that happens. Like there are misunderstandings between the entrepreneur and the attorney about what our preference is on a particular term, and that might not be baked into the document properly. But when there are mistakes and it's on a flat fee, you're not getting charged extra for them to make it up and to make it right. And so I think that's one solve. I mean, I honestly, I would never work with an attorney again who had made a mistake and then charged me to fix the mistake. To us, we just kind of want to be like, hey, look, if there are any mistakes, please let us know. We'll make it up, we'll make it right, and we'll make it square. Let's move forward. If a firm is not doing that, then I think it's time to think about working with somebody else.
Yeah, completely agree. And it works with investors as well. We had an unfortunate situation happen and we had to, pay for services rendered, even though it wasn't the outcome we wanted. But it's about building that long-term relationship and having transparency throughout the process.
There are twists and turns in the engagement, along the way. That's like, if it's outside of the lawyer's control, you can't hold them accountable for that. It's just the situation. But if there are mistakes or whatever word you want to use as less overt than mistakes, and then it should be cleaned up. They should do it on their dime.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we've had to review a lot of documents ourselves that lawyers have prepared. And, we're not sending a bill to our companies for the work that we're doing on the documents, but it would be pretty shocking if the lawyer made the mistake and then sent another bill correcting their own mistake of an additional cost. I don't think you would want to work with that counsel again. So you just mentioned a great review that you got from one of your clients, which sounds like you obviously are holding up to that transparency part of things. But for a new customer, a new startup, it's very difficult to vet lawyers, unlike you are for vetting startups for ourselves as an investor. So there's no real reliable rating systems out there for lawyers. You typically search for a firm online or you get a referral from an existing business contact. So how should founders develop better ways to vet lawyers besides based on referrals?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to this. I don't think I have a particularly smart or intelligent answer to this. I do think that a lot of our entrepreneurs are told by other entrepreneurs, work with these guys, that they're great. And I don't think that there's any Yelp for lawyers yet that's any good. Avo exists. We actually have a lot of ratings on Google Maps. It's whatever. It is what it is. Look, if you see some consistent negative ratings online, that's probably a red flag. The marketplace hasn't developed sufficiently to have, I think, like really good, reliable ratings out there yet. Avo, avvo.com is the one that's trying to do it, but I think it's like pretty cheesy and like not that great.
So it sounds like Yellow Pages is still the best place to get reviews from lawyers, unfortunately. Maybe someone could create something a bit better for the next generation.
We need a glass door for lawyers.
Is there not one?
I don't know of one.
Because that definitely seems like, it's an expensive service. You're paying a lot, for these types of services. there should be a better system to help review. And it sounds like you're obviously on the path of trying to build in that transparency using, references from people who are going through the same situations as future customers of startups and stuff like that. What about the things that you're doing or other lawyers like you are doing right off the bat that are helping startups? How should startups think about what they need off the bat when they come to work with people like you?
There is a whole suite of kind of services that you'll probably need in the first year, basically. And it's around incorporation, which includes thinking about how to structure and where to be located. It's and thinking about all of the questions around founders' equity, including kind of how you're splitting up the pie internally, and your stock option plan for your employees. So that's kind of like slug number one is like getting the company set up and allocating its stock at the outset. And then you have kind of, the way I like to think about it is a company is a web of relationships. So you have your relationship between the company and the shareholders. And then you have your relationship between the company and the service providers. So that's the independent contractor agreement, your employment agreement, your CIIA agreement around confidentiality and invention assignment, and potentially separation agreements, if you have to let people go. NDAs, so those are kind of more client-facing usually, which is to say we don't want shared to everybody, so let's keep that under wraps. And then if you're doing any web product, you'll need terms of service and privacy policy, which is kind of like more customer-facing.
Some companies, obviously a little bit later than startups, early stage startups, often have a general counsel lawyer, which is often an independent lawyer, not a big firm, who has general expertise around contracts and miscellaneous items that come up, and they can handle lots of stuff. So what do you suggest around these general counsel roles, and what kind of things should they be helping with, and how should entrepreneurs think about them?
What we're seeing is this is becoming more and more of a trend. We serve the general counsel. We serve a lot of different roles, but in some cases we serve the general counsel role for a number of our clients, and they may work with a bigger firm for fundraisers or for M&A or for some sort of bigger transaction, but are not interested in paying $700 to an hour to get something simple done. We personally love playing that role, and we've created a product called General Counsel, which does that exactly. Serves all the day-to-day needs. And the way we've set it up is very much like a SaaS company. So you might say it's legal as a service as opposed to software as a service, flat monthly fee for all of the day-to-day legal needs.
And so walk me through some examples of clients you have that have really taken a liking to this model, and how has the model changed as they continue to grow?
After having this product out for 5 years, we did a ton of research in December, actually, so very recently. And we got a lot of feedback on where it's working, where it's not. One of the things that we learned is that we had a one-size-fits-all approach, a flat monthly fee, one size, that's it. And we had a lot of feedback that like, hey, having something grow with us would be really helpful. So we just did what we should have done 5 years ago, which is create 3 tiers of service. One's more basic, we call launch, and that's all of basically the stuff that I just went through when we were talking about incorporation. It's that level of service. As you grow, you'll need equity management, and then as you grow further, you'll need some other things like corporate governance and stuff like that. So what we found is that people love the option of being able to select which level of service makes sense for them, and that's like just 101 level pricing for a SaaS company. We should have thought about it way earlier, but we let our customers tell us we need to do it, and then we did it.
I love that. I mean, one, you listened to your customers and you actually delivered on what they were asking for, and you brought transparency to the ecosystem that was sort of only available at that entry-level package. A lot of law firms have that startup package. $5,000 gets you your basic, starting point for incorporation and maybe some of your cap table stuff. But after that, it's completely a la carte. You can go from $5,000 to $50,000 as soon as you either start raising some capital or your company grows beyond 10 employees. But you guys did not stop at the $5,000, entry-level fee. You built in stages so that there was full transparency after that, so that there wasn't any ambiguity from going from 5,000 to 50,000 and 500,000, let's say.
Yeah, and what we found with the way that we actually came up with this is the firm was 8 years old, we just kind of did an analysis of like, what's the 80-20? What's the 80% of work that our clients need most of the time? And can we bundle that together and do it for a flat monthly fee? What we found is that folks love that it's pretty simple on the cash flow. There are some things that will be outside of this that you'll have to deal with in a year, but they're very minimal, and you'll be able to plan like, cool, this is my legal budget for the year, and add a little bit of margin, but that's probably what it's going to be. and life is good. What we've found is that, going back to one of the earlier questions, is that we're able to invest in the company more and get to know them better. They love it because they feel that they're being heard. There isn't a $600 fee to send an email. They can reach out whenever. And we love that because then we're not getting the phone call at 9 p.m. saying, oh my gosh, the house is burning down and we need you to fix something tonight before midnight. And so it creates this really symbiotic relationship that allows us to get better over time. Because as we know the client better, we're able to get better at doing the things that they do more often. So
it comes back to the transparency of both ways.
Exactly.
You can jump in, you can jump out. And that's really clear for me to hear as an early stage investor. The more updates we get from our companies, the better we are at handling those, shit hit the fan kind of moments for them, which is most of the time when lawyers are actually being called in, right?
Well, hopefully we love being called in when it's like, we need to close this big deal and it's going to be a huge, this is going to represent like the biggest deal we've closed to date. I love those conversations. Those are really fun to figure out. Cool. Well, let's get this deal closed then. Let's make it happen.
And what kind of referrals are you seeing your team get now that you've built this model and this transparency approach to servicing customers?
It's slowly, then all of a sudden. So the trickle kind of becomes a bigger stream as we move forward. And as there are clients that have been on this new approach to legal services, as more of them are on it, more of them talk to their friends and say, hey, you may want to think about it. And it's been great. It's been really cool. It's great to have a conversation with any client to be like, can you get this independent contractor agreement done for us? Yes, we can. Okay, cool. But it's more fun to say, let's build something together, or let's at least be an ongoing architect for the building that you're doing,
Yeah, too bad you couldn't take the Obama slogan, yes, we can, because that would have been great for your firm. Now, before we wrap things up, we always love to ask our guests for any book recommendations, whether business related or outside of that. Any ones that you have on top of your mind that our guests should read?
Yeah, at the beginning of every year, I read 2 books in every January because they've been really impactful for me. The first is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. I don't know, have you read that one, Matt?
I'm not.
It's super important for me because it is about doing less but doing better. Instead of making progress an inch in 1,000 different directions, you're making progress towards one specific direction. So I love that reminder at the top of the year to say, hey, what's important this year and what do I need to say no to? Because a lot of the essentialist kind of mindset is saying no to things that are good in order to say yes to things that are great. So that's really been highly influential for me. And then Rising Strong by Brené Brown has been such a powerful book in my life because it is just a really clear roadmap to processing your emotions, being able to understand actually how am I feeling in this moment, communicating them to people that are in your life that you care about, and then being able to kind of work through it together. So I think that that's really helpful in my personal life, and I think my wife appreciates it. And it's actually been helpful in my professional world. I had a tough call with a client yesterday morning, where there was what was revealed at the end of the engagement, kind of some misalignment on what both of us thought was the desired outcome. I had to kind of work through my own process before I got on a call with them because I felt frustrated and angry and upset with where things were going. But it was great to work through, sit down, and being able to acknowledge, okay, I understand where our fault is in this, and let's work to make it right. And I think that if I hadn't had Brené Brown's kind of teaching in my life, I think that I probably would have handled a lot of those situations differently.
No, I love that. Those sound like incredible book recommendations, and I'll definitely have to check those out. I remember when I used to work in banking, capital markets, I worked with a colleague who used to, before she got on the phone to, scream at a client or something, she would actually type out her conversation in an email and then say it back to herself and see how it sounded receiving that back to herself. And she would lip talk the whole thing out loud and I'd have to listen to it. But it was a really cool strategy and it worked well for her. And I've incorporated that into my own emotional response system when things are not looking well.
I'm curious about your books.
My wife is pregnant and she's due with our first child. So I've been reading a lot of pregnancy books over the last couple months, but I've got probably 20 books I need to get through. And I've been listening to a couple audiobooks right now. And I guess the one thing I've been doing is doing audio masterclasses. I've been doing Daniel Pink's sales masterclass, which I thought was quite amazing. And it's efficient to have to not sit in front of a computer doing it anymore, but listening to the audio version. Well, this has been an incredible chat, Kyle. Thank you so much for joining us in the tank today. And I love the way that you're disrupting legal as a service and reimagining how law firms can serve startups. Thanks again for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. Be well.
Thanks for listening. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And make sure to give me a follow on Twitter or Clubhouse if you want to be in the audience and ask a question on our next Tank Talk. Till next time.